we have a lot of experience in the soil health space, you might say, in Virginia. But isn't it amazing that, with all the experience that I have, that, that I allowed the sampling, this point sampling, to go forward. I just didn't dig into it. And it's, it's where I think we have to step back and keep it simple. So I know that's how the soil health division, I believe, was originally created, to have that keep it simple perspective. And so hopefully you can, you can not just keep it simple, but have it make sense to the farmer. I thought I would actually take a moment here and share this slide. So I'm assuming you can see this slide with these guiding concepts. Perhaps I could lay this out. I believe that looking ahead, a valid question is, are we going to do more DSP projects? And are we going to, whose protocol are we going to follow? Because in the end, what we're really focusing on is trying to influence farmer behavior. And I think we're going to have to look carefully. I think the DSP model, right, contrasting management on similar sites, you have used that for decades to convince farmers. It's used every day in health. You could call it propaganda, presentations. JB and I have used it extensively. We find contrasting sites, we take pictures, we bring soil to a meeting, we put it under a rainfall simulator. And it's just going to get back to this: why are we doing this, right? Why am I testing? Can we bring a higher level of rigor and value to these demonstrations we've been doing? Yeah, that makes sense. Are we going to start to parse out differences that are going to lead to publications, with our Virginia NRCS effort? This project was a reminder of the limits of what we can do in that regard. So, I thought I would put this back up because it's, yes, I think we're going to work some more on this, but maybe we also need to ask different questions about what we're going to do with what we come up with. And I think the last point is farmer engagement. What we know is that if we can really engage the farmers, then they not only learn, but it just adds so much legitimacy and interest. And so I foresee DSP sites that we work on in Virginia in the future really being learning sites where we don't just collect data, but we go back with people, we show and tell. That's ties in maybe with soil health division in a little bit different way. Thought I would share just some of those rambling thoughts. Other comments?
Chris, this is Richard. I'm in the Shenandoah Valley, of course, and my experiences with nutrient management. And I appreciate you going back to that slide, because I've been at this 30 years and farmers tell me not all Frederick is the same. Management makes a difference. So I appreciate that slide.
One of the points that Alexandra brought up before, I think she said, we really, if you're really focused on making sure your sampling sites and are the same genetically, but the particular assessment we're really interested in is biological activity in the top inch. Now, that may not be our interest for every project, but I can tell you right now, it's an interest for a lot of us, is what's going on with biological activity, nitrogen availability in the top couple inches. Well, obviously, if that's your focus, maybe we don't need to be, like Alexander said, we don't need to be so focused on, inherent properties down to 60 inches, right? Maybe we can have broader categories of genetic similarity, and so we can have more latitude to find contrasting sites and management comparisons, that are better suited.
This is Josh again, and that's exactly right. I think you just articulated, Chris, what I was trying to say with my comment that on a couple of levels, I think if the NRCS goal with this data is to look at management differences, then yeah, I think I agree with your last comment that maybe focusing higher up is a good idea.
I think that's ultimately why kind of working with the Soils and Plant Science Division has been useful. And I really wanted to share data. I thought, they're required to do a DSP project every year. Why not kill two birds with one stone, if you will? But yeah, maybe for what we're trying to do, that's not going to be an option. And, that's okay, but it just requires to reevaluate the approach.
Well, you might be able to, if you're just looking at the upper foot or so, and Chris is talking about 2 inches stuff, we might be able to lump well drained and moderately well drained soils together that have similar properties in that area, and then lump the poorly and somewhat poorly drained soils together, looking at them from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Chris Seitz here. I'm over with the soil survey. I will say, like, yeah, understandably, going down to 60 inches might not have as much interesting biological activity with what you might be looking for. But to bring up the Venn diagram description from all the slides back, if we had more time and more people, I can definitely still see situations where it can be a soil health assessment a few years down the line that Virginia's developed, and we still have the DSP, maybe it's changed as well. And they can both be done probably congruently, but maybe if I had more people in my office, like right now it's just me staffed in my office, I could have somebody on the Musameter while I'm describing the pit, and then you all can be going through your processes as well. Like, I can still see the Venn diagram working.
Good, because I do like the partnership. It makes it much more fun, and I think a better learning experience for everybody involved.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we wouldn't have this Venn diagram here if we didn't think, and the question mark, right? If we didn't think there was a possibility of increasing the overlap. So, you could say NRCS could move over to the left, perhaps the SP, can move a little bit to the right. If we reflect kind of some of the realities of what, if Virginia is representative of what, what field offices need, right? If we're representative of that, then maybe there's some lessons learned, from this webinar series, and maybe we can have some influence, on the national DSP. But the sampling example or graphic that Lydia put up, it's not like we shouldn't do the point sampling and the PET-on we should have just done more sampling. We should have done the composite sampling across the field to complement, that. So it doesn't have to be either or. And Chris, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable to think of it as like the DSP projects as, what the Soil and Plant Sciences Division has is like the base, and then we have like DSP plus, for adding the things that we're interested in, but still being able to utilize like all of the time and the work that goes into finding sites and doing that legwork, being able to, I think, add more value to it by being able to accomplish, the priorities and goals of both of these.
Something that's worth mentioning, in terms of this whole idea of staff time, right? Chris, you're up in Pennsylvania and you cover a region that includes the northwestern part of Virginia. Well, there's a different MLRA, right? You have other colleagues who cover Eastern Virginia, and that's where Carl is trying to put together a project, and he's trying to learn from these lessons from the Valley. But in that location, we have a great potential cooperator in Dean Shields. Dean Shields is already committed to a different DSP project and many other tasks, so the truth is that we have to recognize sometimes we don't have the human resource, to do a full-blown potentially, national DSP protocol. We may not, and we have to keep that in mind, I should also mention that we also have the Soil and Plant Sciences Division has provided some grant, or is now providing some grant funds to Virginia Tech. We helped, bring that to pass, so that Virginia Tech will have some dollars to do some sampling. But it's going to take, again, we just have to recognize that a human resource is a limiting factor to many projects in the real world and in NRCS, and so we'll have to bite off what we can chew. Yeah, I just thought I would bring up this slide again, that kind of highlighting, hey, we a month from now, almost a month from now, fourth Friday of February, we plan to come back at this. Fourth Friday in March, we plan to come back at this. We think there's some tremendous examples of positive lessons learned, right, from the implementation logistics. You just could not get better people with more energy and more goodwill. And I think there'll be some things to unpack from that. And, just a incredible amount of numbers coming out of laboratories and stuff that Lydia is trying to wrap her head around. And we'll talk about that. And I think it's, just unpacking the lessons from that. The thing to remember is that we feel like, I feel like that my failure to engage and make sure that the sampling was representative of the whole field is going to hamper our ability to assign some meaning to the lab values. We will get there are lessons to be learned from all the lab work. They may not be the lessons we expected, our uncertainty kind of about the full range of past history on these sites, it means that we're going to be very tentative in assigning a lot of meaning to the comparisons. But we still think there's going to be a lot to unpack. So, I just thought I would whet your appetite. Remember, we're going to come back and talk about this some more. It does seem like some of the discussion has dried down a little bit. But we are still here. If anyone has anything else to say or ask.
At the peril of maybe making this last too long and stuff, in looking at the sampling that was, we normally look at that 10-meter area to do our sampling, detailed sampling in and stuff. Are we maybe looking at a possibility to still use that for the detailed sampling, but to expand our area into zones of that particular field or pasture or whatever, to look at sampling other parameters such as organic matter? It wouldn't be that difficult. It'd be a little bit time consuming, but it wouldn't be that difficult to walk around with a probe and randomly sample each one of those areas, and then use that as a sample to look at for different uses to see if that made that much of a difference. And then use the protocol from national to do the detailed work. Is that kind of where we're moving?
In my opinion, yes. I think that's probably the only way forward that, kind of makes sense and maybe addresses some of the challenges we had. But you have to make sure the probe can actually fit in the ground. Because right when we were sampling, it was too dry and you couldn't even get a standard fertility probe in the soil.
Yeah, I know. I was there and I saw how dense that it almost looked like everything was compacted.
So
I think too, I've talked to a lot of different people about this, like how to sample, the best way to sample. And the other approach that's been brought to my attention has been to base this sampling off of what they do for NRI and how they sample for that. It's been another I guess, approach that's been like recommended to me. So I don't know that much about it, but that's just another option that I've heard about.
Part of the, I think that the interesting thing here is we have different disciplines coming together, and we have different assessments. And I think it's going to be important to go through the list of each assessment we want to do, and we're going to have to match up practicality, right, with what's ideal. I believe it would be ideal, right, to do every assessment on each point shown on this screen, right? I mean, ideally, you'd like to take the amusometer, ideally, out to each point. Ideally, you'd like to do an infiltration measurement at each point, because that would better characterize the field. And I think that's the first point. Everybody has to recognize, if you're trying to characterize the influence of management, you should not be doing point sampling, period. You should be doing as much representative sampling as possible. I think Josh mentioned that. And it's kind of obvious, and an agronomist should know that. And that's part of why I keep smacking myself in the head and saying, why didn't you pay attention, to the protocol that these guys were following? But I'll never forget to do it this now. So I don't think it's so much that we should be doing point sampling. It should be doing as much representative sampling as possible. We have to look at practicality. And for some assessments where we actually want to collect, just a surface soil, right? And some are in the DSP protocol already. Like they're saying, do permanganate oxidizable carbon. I mean, I don't see where it makes sense for anyone to take a sample of just the surface and one point, right? So we're going to have to work this out. We're going to figure out which assessments we're doing and what the sampling protocol should be, to meet the national parameters if that's desired, but also to get this more meaningful data. Representatives of sampling, right, for soil fertility sampling. I mean, this is an immense question we've struggled with for years and years, and ultimately, I think I don't know if Alan's still here, but ultimately what we probably should be doing to do it rigorously is each sampling spot should be geo-referenced. That's how you do it. And then you can come back to the exact same location the next time, because soils are heterogeneous. There's going to be variability across this whole field. It's all about practicality. What can we do? But we know this is a flawed approach if we are going to, right? We know this is a flawed approach if the goal is to characterize the impact of management on soil properties, surface soil properties across this field. This is a flawed sampling approach. We can make it better. It's just a question of how much better can we make it. Hopefully we can do something more like this.
But if we do it like what's being shown right here, are we going to be doing the intensive sampling at each one of these spots like we are in the primary site? Or are we going to be, I realize the value of getting all these other points and sampling and stuff like that, but the amount of time that it will take and manpower to get the A horizon samples, the KSATs, the bulk densities, the infiltration rates, and all this kind of stuff of every one of these sites is going to be
yeah.
Is the state office going to allow us to do that?
No. I mean, again, if you were to do that level of detail and characterization, right? Let's just give it the level of characterization that you guys did on these 3 red dots is so time consuming that if you tried to replicate, just make clear, if you tried to replicate the level of effort that you put in personally with your mesosmeters and that everybody else put in on these 3 spots, if you try to do that across this whole field, you would, on each of these other spots, I mean, you're talking about like hiring a graduate student. I think that would be a graduate student's master's or PhD project, and it would take an immense investment. We're obviously we can't do that, right? But there are some assessments, particularly where we're just sampling the surface, because that's where we would expect soil fertility changes, biological activity changes, right? If we're just sampling the surface, then this is not a lot of work, right? To send to France Louvers or send them to Cornell for particular assessments. But yes, I mean, we can't, yes, it would be impossible to do. So it's going to have to be a compromise.
I think the other thing,
and it needs to be thought through.
I was gonna say, I think the other thing is like I know you said it's like a project for a graduate student or something, but I know that Dr. Stewart isn't on here right now. But I mean, that's where this effort is going for us. So even just thinking about the things that might seem out of reach, like some of them, not all of them, but if there were certain aspects that we wanted to focus on, that could be realistic, just depending on what it is. But just something to think about when you're thinking about how to move forward.
Yeah. And I would say if I would be advising a new PhD student, I'd be like, yeah, remember the lesson number 2, right, Lydia? Know the site history, because you're talking about investing much more time than even our guys did. You know, they just invested time in these characterizations. So make sure you pick your sites well, right? That's the other element. And sampling protocol does not overcome the need to know your site histories if you're interested in drawing meaningful conclusions from the site history.
Yeah, and that's the input that Ryan had for us when we talked through this was, you know, you can do the best sampling protocol, you can have the best sampling protocol, you can collect all the samples flawlessly, you can make sure they're representative, but if your sites or your treatments or your management isn't well defined and accounted for and isn't doesn't match what you're doing, it doesn't matter like how well you do your sampling.
In a site that has variability like we have seen on this one demonstrated right here, where would you want to have that detailed sample taken?
My question to start is to answer your question with a question, which would be, you know, what the detailed assessment, what assessments will be run, and what is the information going to be used for? And I think that's going to, you know, that will help inform it, right?
I totally agree with that, you know, because if you come over to the right side of that pasture where you're feeding them, you're going to have less infiltration rates because it's going to be more compacted because the animals are there more frequently and stuff. The same over here where the trees are with that type of thing. And then you've got the middle area that represents where it's more averaged as to what you don't have as much traffic. So your infiltration rate should be better and the less compaction and maybe better organic matter too.
This is me, Chris. Practically, I would just say the area that most of the sites have in common, that way it would be easier to compare them. So like in an ideal world, let's just say all of them are circles and the center of the circle is the least disturbed part for some reason. Then you would just want to sample the center of the circle for all the sites. That way it would be easier to compare them all. So yeah, that would just be my 2 cents.
And this goes back to, in this example, you know, Lydia she highlighted how useful it might be, even if the farmer doesn't have 50 years of history in his head, to walk this field with someone like JB, who has a decade of experience walking fields like this and knowing animal patterns. So you get JB and the farmer, in addition to everybody else who was involved, you might better be able to, you make an educated decision about where to place this ped-on, or I guess it should say sampling zone, right? You make the best educated decision you can. And the answer to me is it depends, right, Chris? And that's the importance of having the right people in the right amount of time. And this is what we do in all the time in characterizing soil properties, for agronomic decision making. It's not that we apply the same sampling protocol to every field. When you do precision soil sampling, you want to characterize the top 6 inches and its fertility, let's say. It's a combination of knowing the field and talking to the farmer about its history and its characteristics, and you look at the inherent characteristics and you look at the practicality. So there's a little bit of an art to it. I think we can apply that here, hopefully.
I think that's why the idea of thinking about like our management and like how we're defining our, no, we don't like to use the term like treatments, maybe not categorically like it's either this or this, because then everything has to be, it's just hard to make it fit into those categories. And so I feel like that highlights the value and maybe looking at it a different way and making it more of a continuum, a continuous variable, because like that's just more accurate to what is really happening out there.
When we circle back, ultimately, we have to recognize that some of us, like, again, I blame myself a lot because I was involved. JB wasn't, we really didn't involve him, but I was involved. And I should have had the foresight to tell, hey, Alexandra, this is a tough task you're taking on, because when you think about, of all the different land management systems where we're trying to find a representative location, pastures are going to be the most challenging. If you were to look at, inherent in annual crop production is we're trying to make the field uniform, you know what I mean? And especially if it's heavy tillage, we're literally modifying the surface soil, and trying to make it uniform. We're tilling it all the same way. Whereas these low intensity management systems, right, where they let the cows kind of decide where to go, that's got to be the hardest. That's the hardest thing to characterize, pick the character, or I say pick a representative spot. So again, just should have kind of thought about that one. And I think the direction we're going to go in is not just look at grassland anymore, probably look at grassland and look at cropland and different sort of styles of cropland management. So on the same Frederick, right, for example. And we'll probably be able to draw some more meaningful results more easily.
That's the goal.
I'd just like to say one other thing. I've heard Alexandra beat up on herself, and I'm hearing Chris beat up on himself. But I really think that what happened last summer in the Valley was the best learning experience we could have had. I realized that the results we got may not be as good as we had hoped they might be, but it was a very good, it may have been, in other words, it may have been even better that we did it this way, so that from now on we can move forward in such a way that the sampling we do and the time we spend is more beneficial.
I sincerely hope that's true, Carl. I think you're right. It's been a long journey.
Yeah, and I think you might have picked the very best thing to conclude on. So I think that's a great way to end. I personally just cannot thank all of you enough, but Lydia and Alexandra, you must have practiced a lot, because you did a super job. Very proud to be on your team. for today. And we look forward to seeing you next time.